what are the common denominators you would say to how someone adapts to a slight change of plans and they do it well? What would be some of the common denominators of when they do it poorly?
Yeah. Well, so one is recognizing that at our core, we as humans just tend to dislike uncertainty. Mm-hmm. So there's a research study showing that people who had a smaller chance of getting an electric shock were far more stressed out than people who had far more certainty that it was going to happen. So we'd rather be certain that a bad thing's going to happen than have to cope with feelings of uncertainty. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that I've tried to do in terms of a tip for listeners is to change my relationship with uncertainty and actually build a stronger identity with it. And so I've actually tried to, we know from research on identity priming that we tend to act in ways that align with our current social identities or our aspirational identities. Mm-hmm. And so I've tried to start identifying myself as someone who excels during times of uncertainty, as someone who's challenge-oriented, who doesn't need what we call cognitive closure, which is a reduction of ambiguity, but actually someone who thrives in the face of ambiguity. Right. And that change won't happen overnight. It's not like you can give yourself a label and suddenly, my personality changes. But this is absolutely a mindset that people can cultivate over time, which is instead of running away from uncertainty and change, we actually pride ourselves as the type of people who can thrive in it. And we know that that can we know that can in turn affect behavior. Yeah. Another thing that I would share that I've learned from my guests is, we tend to be really bad cognitive forecasters. We're really bad at predicting, for example, the types of things that will make us happy or unhappy in the future. Right. And that is absolutely true in the domain of change as well. We tend to have these overly simplistic models of how the big changes in our lives will change us. And I think that's because when we think about a change and how it will affect us, we tend to focus very narrowly on the specific change itself, almost as though that change is operating in a vacuum. And so we think about the most obvious things that might result from that change. Okay, I'm navigating a cancer diagnosis. Okay, I'm navigating a new relationship. Okay, I'm navigating a promotion, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But our lives and our psychology are so complex. And what that fails to appreciate is that change in one area of our lives often have profound spillover effects into other areas of our lives that we simply can't predict at the outset. And so what my guests have often been surprised by is that changes that they initially coded as exclusively good or exclusively bad tend to have a lot more complexity around them. Mm-hmm. That they ended up changing in these unexpected ways, and that what was actually important at the beginning of their change experience was to approach change with a profound amount of humility. Yes. To not try and bucket it into good or bad, but to actually see it as carrying, to see these changes as actually having the nuance and complexity that they genuinely do. Right. And so I found a lot of power in, again, having humility in the face of change, auditing myself and how I'm changing in unexpected ways in the face of change, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And at a minimum, there will be growth because change necessarily involves a loss of identity of some kind, right? Mm-hmm. And as we grapple with those new identities, as we grapple with that kind of adjustment, you will at a minimum see growth of some kind. And so I think that there's an optimism there that I now carry, which is to just see change as a far more nuanced psychological space that we occupy.
Yeah, beautiful stuff. I mean, there's so much there. I can tell why you're busy all the time with all your episodes. One of the dynamics is because I'm also interested in transformation and change. Yeah. And one of the things I've repeatedly heard people who do well with when change happens to them as much as when they happen to change is the ability to be present. And the ability to be present in the here and now. And many people, some folks who had huge success stories in their life will talk often about what they would catch themselves doing is project their past into their future. And that's where all the anxiety comes. And that's why, my mom used to say the only person who likes change is a baby with a wet diaper. Right, and that most people resist it, right, and people become hostile to it, and divided over it, and it's a lack of control and a lack of identity, and these are very foundational things. And next thing you know, people are having identity crises over these things. And I've just repeatedly seen people who've done well with change, the ability to stay present, and then couple that with what you're talking about is the humility to come with it. And I actually don't know how this is going to turn out. Like, I know I have experiences, but I have no idea how this is going to turn out. and I've got to see the good in this. I've got to go with this, and maybe this is going to take me somewhere. I had a conversation with a young man last night who had a specific path. He wanted to be a professional basketball player, and one thing after another, these doors are closing. And he kept saying, these doors are closing, these doors are closing. And I go, well, maybe it's a corridor. Maybe it's a corridor. You know, what's happening is that door's closing, and that door's closing, and that door's closing. And maybe there's a door down the end here. That's the door you really want to walk through. And it's been interesting. I've been helping this young man, and he was ready to play professional basketball. He was going through all these different applications. I keep asking him different questions. And now he's talking about being a coach and how perhaps that's what he wanted to do all along. And all these opportunities to play that were, my hopes are dashed, this didn't work out. And you can get frustrated, you can get angry, you can get bitter, you can get resentful, or those doors closing are actually a corridor and there's something really good down there. If you can stay in the present so you can think clearly, and then stay humble so you can learn from it, that does seem to be a pretty willing formula for dealing with change.